Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to speak today on the government's investment in agriculture, fisheries and forestry, and I thank the member for Paterson for her words regarding the impact of the terrible weather event in May this year had on primary producers across the Mid-North Coast and Hunter regions, and my thoughts and prayers continue to go out to them. They're still struggling very much with the aftermath. Many still can't get onto paddocks because they're still too wet. So there's a long way to go for farmers. But today I want to focus on the simple fact that the Albanese government is failing agriculture and failing regional Australia. Labor's first term in government was one defined by ignorance, neglect and incompetence. Ignorant in particular because this government and recent Labor governments never take a 360 policy perspective on agriculture. It's one-sided, activist-led and anti-primary producers. And there's no better example of that than live exports and the live sheep export ban. Now, I'm more familiar with this issue than most, having been the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Livestock Exporters Council from 2012 to 2016. I came into that role after the 2011 live export ban, 6 months after, and worked with the industry through the implementation of the exporter supply chain assurance system and the changes to the trade. And the impact of that decision lives with us today, and the threat of that decision lives with us today. The changes that the industry made back then were hard fought, and Australia still remains, out of 130 exporting countries, the only country that regulates animal welfare from the farm to the point of slaughter through the Australian Standards for the Export of Livestock and the Exporter Supply Chain Assurance System. Now, one of the things I noticed during my time running the live export industry was that the government never truly understood why we have live exports from Australia. And it's a critical issue in understanding why this trade is so important, not only to Australian primary producers but to the markets that we supply to, because there's clearly a cultural differentiation. Now, I know that many people in Australia are used to going to a supermarket or a butcher, and they pick up some meat, they pick it, if it's in a cellophane pack in a supermarket, and they think that is a fresh meat. They trust the process. But in the Middle East and Indonesia and other countries, it's not that. They don't have the same view. Now, I got the privilege of visiting a number of abattoirs in my time in the Middle East and in Indonesia, and to see a father and a son come up to a pen of Australian merino sheep and pick and select one of those sheep because it looked healthy, and they translate that to the quality of the meat. That is not something that we understand here in Australia, but we need to respect the cultural differences that other countries have before we make decisions on banning and threatening other countries' food security. Now, the other impact that the live sheep trade and the live export trade have had is on training in animal welfare. Now, in the Middle East, a lot of the workers that worked in the feedlots and the abattoirs came from the subcontinent. They didn't have education. They were often the lowest of the low workers. With our training programs, we actually showed them respect and value for the first time in their lives. Can you imagine what that feels when the first time somebody says to you, "You've done a great job, I value what you've done," how that changes your practices? That's the sort of impact that we had. Yet now that's gone in the Middle East with this ban. There's going to be none of that impact that Australian exporters have had. What's happened instead is that sheep will be coming from other countries without the same standards, without the same concerns, and the impact on Australian sheep producers is extensive, and no amount of compensation will ever make up for the impact of this ban. So my question to the Minister is allowing this policy to be implemented sets a precedent for any lawful agricultural industry. So which industry will Labor sacrifice?